The storm came down like God had turned his face away from the mountains. Snow slammed against the windows of the Pine Cone Diner in hard white sheets, rattling the old glass in its frames and packing itself against the door until the world outside looked erased. No road, no tree line, no sky. Just a frozen wall of wind and dark. The diner sat alone off Highway 145, 20 miles from the nearest real town and 5 miles from the last working cell tower. It was the kind of place truckers trusted hunters remembered and locals used as a landmark when the weather turned mean. A squat building of pine logs and yellow light with a red neon coffee cup buzzing weakly in the front window. Inside, the heat worked hard and still lost. Maggie Doyle moved behind the counter with a towel over one shoulder, topping off coffee for the only 3 customers, brave or dumb enough to be out that night. The old radio near the pie case spat static between warnings. Whiteout conditions across San Miguel County. Motorists advised to shelter in place. Sheriff's office reports multiple closures. Then the wind shoved its fist against the building, and the radio snapped into a hiss. In the back corner where the overhead light had burned out months ago, Elias Thorne sat in his wheelchair, with both hands wrapped around a chipped mug he had not touched. He was 68, broad through the shoulders, in the way old warriors sometimes are, like the body remembers what life took from it. His gray beard was trimmed close. His eyes were pale, tired, and fixed on nothing. A heavy wool coat covered his lap, but not enough to hide the outline of the carbon fiber prosthetics strapped beneath it. Most people saw the chair first, then the legs that were not there. Then they looked away too fast and called it respect. Elias preferred the corner. The wind rose again, long and sharp, scraping across the roof like metal across bone. His fingers tightened around the mug. The sound changed. Not wind now. Rotors. A Black Hawk cutting through Afghan night, choking sand-red tracers coming up from the ridge. Men shouting over comms. Somebody screaming for a corpsman. The hot stink of fuel. The heavy thump in his chest before the blast found them. Elias stopped breathing. His eyes stayed open, but the diner slipped sideways. Maggie became a shadow behind smoked glass. The pie case became a med table. The snow outside became dust. He could hear Chief Ramos yelling, "Thorne, move your ass!" He could feel the deck under him buck. He could feel his boots, both of them, right before he couldn't. Under the table, Titan moved. The Belgian Malinois had been lying silent at Elias's feet, a dark shape with amber eyes and a scar down one side of his muzzle. Old for a working dog, but still wired tight beneath the fur. He did not bark. He did not whine. He simply rose, pressed his body against Elias's shins, then pushed his head up under the edge of the coat and laid the full weight of his skull across Elias's thigh. Deep pressure. Steady. Trained. Familiar. Elias's hand shook once, then found the dog's neck. Titan leaned harder. The Black Hawk faded by inches. The diner returned in pieces. Coffee, grease, pine cleaner, Maggie's old perfume. Snow burning against the windows. The clock over the counter stuck at 9:17 because Maggie never remembered to wind it. Elias dragged air into his lungs. "Good boy," he whispered, barely sound at all. Titan blinked once. Maggie glanced over from the counter. She knew enough not to fuss. She had married a Marine in 1972 and buried him in 2009, and grief had taught her when to speak and when to keep pouring coffee. "You want that warmed up, Elias?" she asked softly. He looked down at the mug as if surprised it was there. "No, ma'am. I'm squared away." A lie, but a polite one. Maggie nodded like she accepted it. "Road's gone ugly. You and Titan may be sleeping in that booth tonight." Elias gave her half a smile. "Wouldn't be the worst rack I've had." The bell above the door gave a tiny, nervous tremble. Titan's ears lifted. Elias noticed. The dog's head came off his lap. His body stayed low, but the calm was gone. The old K9 stared at the front entrance, every muscle drawn tight under his coat. Outside, something thudded. Not wind. A shoulder. Maggie froze with the coffee pot in her hand. The two men at the counter, both linemen from the power company, turned on their stools. Another hit slammed the door so hard the hinges screamed. Then the door burst open. Snow exploded into the diner. Two young men stumbled in with it, breathing hard, faces red from cold and fear. The first one was tall and narrow with a patchy beard and eyes that kept jumping from corner to corner. His black jacket was torn at the sleeve. The second was heavier bull-necked, wearing a camo hoodie under a canvas coat. He kicked the door shut behind them and leaned his weight against it like he expected the storm to follow him inside. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The tall one spotted the customers. His jaw flexed. The heavy one adjusted the strap of a canvas duffel bag slung over his shoulder. It was military surplus, the cheap kind sold in pawn shops and gun shows. Snow clung to it in thick clumps. So did something darker. Not bright, not obvious. Just faint stains along the bottom seam, wet enough to spread where the canvas bent. Elias saw it. So did Titan. The dog did not growl, but his lips tightened just enough to show the tips of his teeth. The tall man wiped snow from his face with a bare hand. His fingers trembled. "Coffee," he said. Maggie set the pot down slowly. "Kitchen's about closed, honey, but I can get you something hot." I said coffee. His voice cut too hard for a man asking. The heavier one scanned the windows, then the old radio, then the back hallway where the restrooms were. Not random, not panic. Procedure badly done. Like somebody who had watched too many briefings and remembered the wrong parts. Elias lowered his eyes before they reached him. Old habit. Never looked like the first threat in the room. The tall one grabbed a booth near the center. The heavier one dropped the duffel on the floor beside him. It landed with a dense, ugly weight. Titan's nose twitched. Once. Twice. Then he pressed his shoulder against Elias's chair. Elias felt the signal travel through the dog's body before he understood it. Not fear. Confirmation. The kind of cold that had nothing to do with the storm moved into Elias's chest. He looked at the bag. He looked at the men. The blizzard outside howled over the roof, sealing the Pinecone Diner off from the rest of Colorado, from the sheriff's office, from every clean answer and every easy way out. Elias set his untouched coffee down. Under the table, Titan shifted closer, ready for a command that had not yet been given. And in that dim corner beside the old veteran, everyone had already dismissed. The war came quietly back inside. Jackson took the center booth like he owned it. He slid in first, back to the wall, angled toward the windows and the door. Brody stayed standing, breathing through his mouth, both hands near the canvas duffel on the floor. Snow melted off his coat and dripped onto Maggie's linoleum. Maggie kept her hands where everyone could see them. "You boys want coffee? I'll bring coffee," she said. "No need to bark at folks in my place." Brody looked at her, and something mean moved behind his eyes. "Lady, just get it hot and get it fast." One of the linemen started to turn. Elias caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. "Don't." The man swallowed it and faced his plate again. Titan's shoulder pressed harder into Elias's chair. The dog's nose worked the air in short bursts, not sniffing like a pet under a dinner table. Sampling, sorting, running a field check the way he had been taught outside burned-out trucks where a wrong scent meant a folded flag. Elias watched the duffel without watching it. Diesel, wet canvas, cheap tobacco. Then the deeper note reached him because once a man has smelled it in war, he never mistakes it. Old gunpowder, rust, fresh blood. Titan lifted his muzzle and touched Elias's right hand once. Pause. Twice. Pause. 3 times. Elias's pulse dropped instead of rose. That rhythm was not anxiety. It was a sit rep. Titan had used it in Kandahar when words could get men killed. 3 touches meant human blood. A hard press after meant weapons. The hard press came next. Elias closed his fingers around the dog's ear briefly. Received. Maggie brought 2 mugs to the booth. The coffee trembled against the rims, though her face stayed calm. Jackson grabbed his before it hit the table. "You got a phone, landline's out," Maggie said. Storm took it. Cell, she looked at the old wall by the register. "You see a tower out there, honey?" Brody laughed once. "Cute." Jackson stared at her too long. His pupils were wide. Not drunk. Wired. Elias had seen that look when an asset realized the exfil plan was dead and Langley was not coming. People under pressure either followed training or came apart. These two were already coming apart. The radio crackled near the pie case. "All units be advised. Armed robbery and Telluride. Suspects believed northbound." Jackson's head snapped toward it. Maggie moved to turn the volume down, but Brody crossed the floor and slapped the radio off the counter. It hit the tile and split open batteries skittering beneath a stool. The room went quiet enough to hear the storm pushing its nails under the roof. Brody turned slowly. Anybody else got a problem with silence? No one answered. Then Jackson noticed Elias. Maybe it was the wheelchair. Maybe it was Titan. Maybe cruelty needed a weak target. Jackson slid out of the booth and walked toward the corner with his mug in one hand. Titan's body lowered. Elias gave a faint tap with his thumb against the armrest. "Hold." The dog held. Jackson stopped beside the table and looked down at Elias like he had found roadkill. "Well, look at this," he said. "Grandpa brought his war dog." Elias looked up slowly. "Evening." That irritated him. Calm usually did. Jackson's eyes dropped to the blanket over Elias's lap. "What happened, old man VA? Run out of spare parts?" Brody snorted from the middle of the room. Maggie's face tightened. "Leave him alone." Jackson pointed at her without looking away. "You keep walking, Grandma." Elias said nothing. Jackson leaned closer. His breath smelled like coffee and panic. "I asked you a question." "Afghanistan," Elias said. "Afghanistan." Jackson rolled the word around, mocking it. "So you were one of those guys. Kicking doors, playing hero, coming home with medals and a sad story." Titan's eyes locked on Jackson's wrist. Elias kept one hand on the dog's head. "Something like that." Jackson tapped the wheelchair with his boot. Not hard enough to tip it. Just enough to stain the air. "Does it make you feel big?" he asked, "bringing that dog around so people don't notice you're half a man?" The words landed colder than the snow. Maggie made a small sound behind the counter. The lineman's fists curled beside his plate. Even Brody looked away, as if Jackson had stepped over some line. Elias did not move, but under the table his thumb brushed Titan's collar in a pattern only the dog understood. "Easy." "Not yet." Jackson smiled, mistaking restraint for surrender. "That's what I thought," he said. "Just another broken old trigger puller waiting for somebody else to save him." Elias looked at the duffel on the floor, then back at Jackson. For the first time that night, his voice lost its softness. "Son," he said, "men who need to scare waitresses and old cripples are usually running from something worse than the law." Jackson's smile died. Across the room, Brody's hand drifted inside his coat. Titan felt it before anyone saw it. The dog's muscles bunched like a loaded spring. And Elias knew the night had just crossed from ugly into lethal. Brody's hand came out of his coat, holding a black pistol. Everything in the diner shrank around it. Maggie stopped moving behind the counter. The lineman went still. The storm kept clawing at the windows, but inside every sound folded into the tiny click of Brody's thumb, finding the safety. "Register," he said. Maggie stared at the gun like it had spoken a foreign language. Brody stepped closer and pointed the muzzle toward her chest. "Now." Elias's hand stayed loose on Titan's collar. Loose mattered. Tight hands made dogs jump early. Jackson kept his eyes on Elias, but his voice went sharp. "Brody, stick to the clock." "Shut up," Brody said. "We need cash. We need wheels. We need to get off this mountain." "You think I don't know that? You don't know anything except running your mouth." There it was. The crack in the crew. No discipline, no command structure, no real plan. Just two scared men with weapons and a bag that smelled like a battlefield. Maggie opened the register with fingers that shook once, then steadied. Jackson noticed Elias watching. He grabbed the edge of Elias's table and flipped it. The coffee mug flew. Hot coffee splashed across Elias's coat and neck. The plate hit the floor and broke under the table. Titan jerked forward with a silent flash of teeth, but Elias drove 2 fingers into the dog's collar. Hold. Pain burned through Elias's skin. His body wanted to react. Training wanted the room-mapped targets split angles owned. But the other part of him, the broken part, had dropped through a trapdoor. The crash of the table was not a table. It was the belly of a helicopter ripping open. The coffee was not coffee. It was hydraulic fluid spraying hot across his face. He heard Ramos again. Not memory. Not imagination. Right there, screaming beside him. "Move, Thorne. Move." Elias locked up. His lungs quit. Jackson bent down close enough that Elias could see the sweat on his upper lip. "Not so mouthy now, huh?" The bell over the door rang. All 4 heads turned. A young deputy stepped in from the blizzard, one shoulder first, fighting the wind. His hat was crusted white. Snow covered his brown uniform. He had one hand lifted against the cold and the other near his radio. "Everybody all right?" and Brody fired. The sound punched the little diner flat. Maggie screamed. The linemen dove from their stools. Deputy Miller spun backward into the doorframe and dropped to the floor from his radio skidding out of his hand and hissing with dead air. For one terrible second, no one understood what had happened. Then Miller groaned. Alive. Hurt bad, but alive. Brody stared at him, stunned by his own hand. "Oh, God." Jackson shoved him hard. "You idiot." He came in. "You just brought the whole county down on us. The county can't get through the pass." "Langley can." Jackson snapped. The word hit Elias through the fog. Langley. Not a street kid's word. Not a bank robber's word. Men like Brody did not say Langley unless someone had fed it to them. Someone with federal shadows attached. Someone who knew the Beltway game and thought pawns could be thrown away in a snowstorm. Elias tried to pull himself back, but the diner split again. Miller on the floor became Petty Officer Deacon Lane in the sand. Maggie's scream became the medevac call. The broken radio hissed like a jammed comm channel under fire. He could smell burned wiring. Blood. Jet fuel. He was back in the bird, pinned blind with dust, his legs caught under metal that had once been floor. He saw his wedding ring blackened with soot. He saw Deacon reaching for him. Then the second blast took the light. Titan moved, not toward the gunman, toward Elias. The dog shoved his muzzle against Elias's face and licked once fast and warm across his cheekbone. Then again. Pressure. Contact. Present time. Elias blinked. The diner snapped back hard. Snow, coffee, gun oil, Maggie crying without sound, Deputy Miller trying to breathe near the door. Titan's eyes were inches from his. "Stay here," they said. Elias exhaled. He let his face go slack, let his shoulders sag, let the tremor come because the tremor sold the lie. Jackson saw it and smiled. "Look at that," he said. "Heroes folding." Elias made a low sound and slid sideways out of the wheelchair, hitting the floor hard beside the overturned table. Maggie cried out. "Elias!" He curled in on himself, one arm across his face, looking for all the world like an old man finally broken by fear. Brody backed toward the register gun, shaking. Jackson kicked Elias's chair aside. Nobody watched Elias's left hand. It moved beneath the fallen coat under the seat cushion that had come loose when the chair tipped. His fingers found the Velcro tab, pulled, slid into the hidden pocket. Cold polymer met his palm. A compact tactical pistol, clean, loaded exactly where an old SEAL would keep it when the world mistook mercy for weakness. Elias wrapped his hand around the grip. Titan lowered himself beside him, silent as breath. The deadline had arrived. Jackson heard the sirens before anyone else did. Not real sirens. Not yet. Just the fear of them screaming somewhere inside his skull. He stood over Elias with the pistol he had taken from under his coat, the barrel wavering above the old man's forehead. Brody was at the register, stuffing bills into his pockets, while keeping his gun on Maggie. Deputy Miller lay near the door, pale, breathing in short pulls, his fingers still reaching for the radio. The two linemen were face down behind the counter. Nobody moved. Nobody prayed out loud. But Elias saw Maggie's lips moving. Jackson kicked the fallen wheelchair. "You think you're slick?" Elias lay on his side, one arm tucked beneath him, his pistol hidden under the loose fold of his coat. His cheek rested against cold tile. Titan was crouched beside the overturned table chest, low eyes fixed on Jackson's wrist. Elias did not look at the dog. That was the hardest part. Titan had been trained to read breath, finger pressure, the small changes that came before a command. One wrong twitch, and the dog would launch. Too soon, and Maggie could catch a round. Too late, and Elias would never give another order. Jackson crouched closer. His voice dropped into something ugly and personal. "You had a gun," he said. "You were going to play cowboy from the floor." Elias let his eyes shake. Let the old fear show just enough. Jackson smiled. "I knew men like you. My father worshipped men like you. Flag on the porch, Bible by the bed. Talked about honor till debt collectors cleaned him out." His jaw tightened. "Honor doesn't pay. Loyalty doesn't feed anybody. This country used him up and forgot him." For 1 second, Elias saw the wound under the crime, a ruined son wearing rage like armor. Then Jackson pressed the muzzle harder. "But I'm not him," he whispered. "And I'm not ending up like you," Brody shouted from the counter. "Finish it, man. We gotta move." "Move!" The word cut through Elias clean. He saw Miller's chest rise, Maggie frozen, the lineman trembling, Brody's gun drifting away from the counter for half a beat. Half a beat was enough. Elias tapped the tile once with his index finger. A soft click. Jackson never heard it. Titan did. The dog moved without a bark, without a growl, without any wasted sound. One instant he was shadow under a table. The next he was airborne. 80 pounds of old war dog hit Jackson's gun arm like a breaching charge. Titan's jaws locked around the wrist. The pistol cracked once into the ceiling, blowing dust down over the booth. Jackson screamed and fell backward. Elias rolled, brought his pistol up, and aimed at Brody. "Drop it!" Brody panicked instead. He fired wildly toward the corner. Rounds snapped over Elias and chewed through wood. Maggie dropped behind the counter. Deputy Miller dragged himself flat. Titan did not release. Jackson slammed against a chair, fighting, trying to tear free. Titan drove him down harder, paws scraping on the slick tile, every inch of him committed to the bite. Brody swung the pistol toward Titan. Elias fired once. The shot struck the coffee machine beside Brody and blew steam across his face. Not a kill shot, a warning with teeth. "Next one is not kitchen equipment," Elias said. Brody staggered, blinded by steam, then fired again. The round hit Titan in the side. The sound the dog made was small. Too small. It punched the breath out of Elias worse than any blast ever had. Titan's legs dipped. His body twisted. Blood darkened the fur along his ribs, spreading fast, but not spraying, not dramatic, just awful and real. Titan Maggie screamed. Jackson tried to rip his arm free. Titan bit down harder. The old Malinois planted himself between Jackson's weapon hand and Elias's body, refusing to give the room back to evil. His eyes stayed clear. His jaws stayed locked. Pain rolled through him, but duty held. Elias's face changed. The shaking stopped. The old man on the floor was gone. What lifted his head now was the kind of cold focus men in black rooms at Langley put in files and hoped they would never meet. Brody saw it. His gun lowered a fraction. Elias's voice came low and flat. "You shot my dog!" Brody stepped back, bumping into the register. Jackson was still thrashing on the floor, but weaker now, his pistol trapped under Titan's weight. The two linemen stared from behind the counter, stunned by the animal who had taken a bullet and still would not let go. Elias dragged himself forward with one arm, pistol steady in the other. Outside, beyond the frozen windows, red and blue lights began to smear through the whiteout. Real sirens this time. Far off, fighting the mountain. Not close enough. Titan's breathing turned ragged. Elias locked eyes with him for one heartbeat. The dog's tail moved once against the floor. Just once. And Elias knew his partner was telling him the same thing he had told him 100 times in the dust and dark. Finish the job. Elias did not rush. Rushing was for young men who thought speed and panic were the same thing. He pulled himself across the tile with one arm, pistol locked on Brody, while Titan held Jackson down with the last of his strength. Steam from the shattered coffee machine crawled through the diner. Red and blue lights smeared across the windows, still too far away, swallowed and returned by the storm. Brody wiped hot mist from his eyes and raised his gun. Elias fired. The round tore into the wall inches from Brody's ear. Wood splinters jumped. Brody flinched so hard his shot went high, punching into the ceiling fan and sending one blade wobbling like a broken clock hand. Elias closed the distance. Not on legs, on will. Brody tried to backpedal, but his boot slipped on spilled coffee. Elias caught his wrist with both hands, turned his body under the gun arm, and used Brody's own weight against him. The pistol clattered across the floor. Brody hit the tile hard enough to knock the air out of him. Elias locked the man's arm behind his back, pinned him with one forearm across the shoulder, and pressed the muzzle of his pistol to the floor beside Brody's face. "Move again," Elias said, "and you will regret having bones." Brody stopped moving. Maggie crawled from behind the counter, shaking one hand pressed over her mouth. "Elias." "Check Miller," he said. She nodded and ran to the deputy. Jackson groaned beneath Titan, his face white with pain and fear. "Call him off." Elias looked at Titan. The dog's sides rose in shallow pulls. His jaws were still locked, but his eyes had softened, searching for the only voice that mattered. "Out," Elias said. Titan released and collapsed against Elias's chair. Jackson curled around his injured wrist, crying now, no swagger left in him. No politics, no rage. Just a scared criminal on a diner floor waiting for judgment to arrive wearing a badge. Elias dragged himself to Titan. The pistol stayed in his hand, aimed low but ready. His other hand found the dog's neck, the old scar under the fur, the steady place he had touched through nightmares and thunder, and every bad night since Afghanistan. "Stay with me, buddy," Elias whispered. "You hear me? That's an order." Titan blinked. His tail moved once. Maggie's voice broke near the door. Miller's breathing. Bleeding, but breathing. Pressure on the wound, Elias said. "Use towels. Keep him talking." The lineman finally moved. One kicked Brody's pistol away. The other tied Brody's hands with a roll of electrical cord from his truck bag, fingers fumbling but determined. Then Titan lifted his head. It should have been impossible. He was hurt, exhausted, shaking so hard his front legs nearly slid out from under him, but his nose twitched toward the canvas duffel beside the booth. A low sound came from his chest. Not pain. Warning. Elias followed the dog's stare. "The bag," he said. Nobody moved. Jackson's face changed. That was enough. Elias pointed the pistol at him. "What's in it?" Jackson looked at the windows, at the lights, at Brody, at the bag. "Cash," he said. Titan growled. Elias dragged the duffel closer by its strap. The stains along the seam had darkened as the snow melted. He unzipped it with 2 fingers. Stacks of bank-wrapped cash spilled out first. Then came a laminated map. Not a bank map, a hydroelectric dam blueprint. Elias's blood went cold. He pulled the paper open with one hand. Silver Creek Dam, spillway access, service tunnels, security blind spots marked in red, times written in block letters, patrol change, generator load, emergency overflow. Under the map sat 2 rectangular blocks wrapped in plastic wires coiled tight around them, and a small timer unit in a foam case. The diner went silent. Even the storm seemed to pull back. Brody started sobbing. "We weren't going to do it. We were just supposed to carry it." "Who gave it to you?" Elias asked. Brody shut his mouth. Jackson laughed weakly from the floor. "You have no idea what this is." Elias looked at the timer. 31 minutes. His voice dropped. "I know exactly what this is." Maggie stared at him. "Elias, if that dam goes," he said, "everything below. Silver Creek gets washed off the map." The lineman beside him turned gray. "That's half the valley." "More," Elias said. "School gym's open as a storm shelter tonight." Maggie closed her eyes. Dear Lord. The front door burst open under a hard shove. Sheriff's deputies poured in, weapons raised, snow flying around them. Behind them came a man in a dark parka with federal eyes and no county badge. "FBI," he shouted. "Hands where I can see them." Elias did not raise the pistol. He slid it across the floor grip first, then pointed at the duffel. "You need bomb squad and dam security on the radio right now," he said. "Timer's live. 30 minutes or less." The federal agent looked into the bag and lost all color. For the first time that night, nobody saw the wheelchair. They saw the man who had stopped the end of a town with 1 wounded dog and an old soldier's refusal to quit. Elias gathered Titan into his arms as best he could. The dog rested his head against Elias's chest. Outside, sirens multiplied across the mountain. Inside, Elias held the only family he had left and prayed the old words his mother had taught him before war had taken so much. "Not yet, Lord," he whispered. "Please, not this one." 3 weeks later, the mountain looked like it had been washed clean by heaven's own hand. The storm was gone. The highway was open. Snow still hugged the pine branches and lay heavy on the rooftops, but the sky above Silver Creek burned a clear Colorado blue. Sunlight struck the windows of the Pinecone Diner, now boarded in places and marked with fresh wreaths, notes, and small American flags, left by strangers who had driven for hours just to stand there in silence. The bomb squad had stopped the timer with 7 minutes left. 7 minutes between a quiet mountain town and a wall of black water. 7 minutes between children sleeping on gym mats and parents digging through wreckage in the dark. By morning, the story had moved from local radio to Denver, then to every screen in the country. 2 armed fugitives, a stolen federal transit file, explosives meant for Silver Creek Dam. A dirty contractor with old Langley access had tried to sell chaos to the highest bidder, and the Beltway boys who thought the mountains were too small to matter learned that small towns keep receipts. Jackson and Brody were alive, handcuffed, indicted, and headed for a courtroom where no snowstorm could hide them. The man who fed them the route, the gear, and the false promise of escape was arrested at Dulles with 3 passports and a phone full of names. Elias saw his face once on the news and turned the television off. He had no interest in ghosts wearing suits. His war was at the veterinary hospital. Room 4 smelled of antiseptic warm blankets and fear trying to become hope. Elias sat in his wheelchair beside the recovery table, dressed in the old Navy uniform Maggie had pressed herself. The fabric pulled tight across his shoulders. His ribbons sat straight. His hands did not. They trembled in his lap as he stared at the closed door. On the other side, Titan was either strong enough to walk out or he was not. The vet had told him the bullet missed the worst places by less than an inch. Surgery had gone long. Infection had tried to take him twice. For days, Titan had drifted in and out, waking only when Elias spoke close to his ear. "Stay with me." That had been the order. Elias had given it every morning. He gave it again now under his breath. The door opened. A hush moved through the hallway outside where half the town had packed itself shoulder to shoulder. Deputies, firefighters, linemen, school teachers, old ranchers in church coats, children holding handmade signs with crooked letters. Maggie stood in front with one hand over her heart. Deputy Miller was there, too pale, but standing his left arm in a sling. The young man had refused the wheelchair they offered him. The vet stepped out first. Then Titan came through. Slow, bandaged, one side shaved close stitches hidden beneath clean white wrap. His front leg dragged for the first 2 steps, then steadied. His ears lifted when he saw Elias. The hallway broke. Not into noise, not at first, into tears. Maggie covered her mouth. Miller looked down hard, blinking like the light hurt him. One of the linemen who had been face down behind the counter wept openly and did not care who saw it. Titan crossed the room with a limp that should have looked weak. It did not. He looked like a soldier coming home. Elias reached for him with both hands. Titan pushed his head into the old man's chest, exactly where he had rested it during the storm, during the nightmares, during every night when Elias had believed the best part of him was buried overseas. Elias bent over the dog and held on. No speech came. No fine words. Just a broken man breathing against the living warmth of the partner who had dragged him back from hell one more time. Outside, Sheriff Laird cleared his throat. "Commander Thorne." Elias lifted his head. The sheriff stepped aside and the hallway straightened. Deputy Miller raised his good hand in salute. Then every officer followed. Then the firefighters. Then the old veterans in the back, some with canes, some with ball caps pressed to their chests, all of them standing as tall as their bodies allowed. Elias stared at them. For years, people had thanked him for his service in grocery lines and parking lots. Quick words tossed over the hard parts. This was different. This was not pity. This was witness. Miller's voice shook, but it held. "You saved my life, sir," he said. "You and Titan saved all of us." Elias looked down at the dog. Titan's tail thumped once against the wheelchair. The sound cracked something open in Elias that war had sealed shut. He returned the salute, not sharp, not perfect. His arm trembled all the way up, but it was enough. Outside, the church bell began to ring across Silver Creek. One clear note after another, rolling over the snow, over the diner, over the dam still standing above the valley. Elias wheeled Titan into the sunlight. The old dog limped beside him, proud and stubborn, wearing his bandages like campaign ribbons. Maggie walked on one side, Miller on the other. Behind them came the town. Elias looked toward the mountains. For the first time in years, he did not hear rotors. He heard bells. He felt Titan's shoulder against his knee, and he knew the darkness had not